His name was Gideon. He slept in the tack room at Carnhale Hall, on straw the horses had done with, and he ate what the kitchen threw down for the dogs. One cold morning he was slow to hold a stirrup. Just slow. The head groom cracked a riding crop across his knuckles for it. The sound of it carried across the yard. And Gideon did not flinch. He only bowed his head, the way a man bows who has decided the blow is not worth his anger. But look at the hands that took the blow. Clean nailed. Careful, the hands of a man who had never dug a ditch in his life. Wrong hands for a drudge. Wrong entirely. The steward of the hall was Josiah Prout, and Prout was master of Carnhale now. At the Michaelmas hiring, with 40 tenants and servants gathered in the yard, he pointed a ringed finger at the ragged hand and said, loud, so all of them would hear it and laugh, "A creature that cannot read his own wages is worth half of them." And they did laugh. Prout's own daughter, Cressida, laughed behind her glove. That night a single candle burned in the tack room, and the ragged hand who could not read his own wages ran one finger down a column of the estate's own ledgers faster than any clerk in the county, down and down, until it stopped. Stopped at a figure that made his jaw go hard as a horseshoe. What number was it? Not yet. Not yet. If you have ever been underestimated by someone who should have looked closer, this story is for you. Before we go on, if these stories mean something to you, take 1 second and subscribe so the next one finds you. And tell me in the comments the town you are watching from tonight. I want to see how far this story travels. Now, let me take you to Cornwall. 11 years ago, the sea off the Cornish coast was said to have taken the elder son of Carnhale. You have to understand the place first. Carnhale Hall stands on the high ground above a fishing town called Porthmerow, where the gulls never stop and the wind comes off the water salted and cold. Below the town, cut into the cliff, was the mine. Wheel Josan, they called it. Tin. For 100 years that tin had paid for everything the hall was and everything it wore. The candles, the horses, the silver, all of it came up out of the dark on the backs of Porthmerow men. The old Earl was Ambrose Renfrew, the 5th of his line. A hard man, folks said, but a fair one, and fairness counts for more than warmth when a whole town depends on your pay. Ambrose had 2 sons. The elder was Gabriel, and Gabriel was the trouble of the county for a season because there had been a quarrel between the father and the son that everyone heard about and no one could quite explain. Words in the great hall. A door slammed hard enough to shiver the glass, and then Gabriel gone to sea in a temper, and a wreck off the manacles that autumn, and a name struck through, in a ledger. 11 years dead. That was the story. That was the story everyone agreed on, and with the elder son drowned, and the old Earl himself dead within the year of a bad heart, who was left to hold Carnhale together? The steward. Josiah Prout. He had a will in his hand, you see. A will, produced very properly, very sadly, that made him master of the estate and guardian of everything in it. And no one argued. Who would argue with a paper and a grieving man's signature and a family with no one left to speak for it? So Prout ruled. 11 years he ruled, and in those 11 years the hall learned a new pleasure, which is the pleasure of having someone beneath you to look down upon. That someone was Gideon. He had arrived one winter, out of the weather, asking for work in the stables and nothing more. He never said where he came from. He never said much of anything. He worked harder than any 2 men and took less than any one, and for that the household did not thank him. They despised him for it. There is a kind of person a house will always turn on, the one who is quiet, who does not push back, who takes the worst place and keeps it clean. The stable lads blamed him for their own mistakes. The kitchen gave him the scrapings. Prout docked his wage on any excuse and no excuse. And Gideon bore it, bowed his head and bore it and said nothing. Only one soul in that whole cold house treated the ragged hand as though he were a man. Her name was Honora Vale. She was 27, and she had come to Carnhale that spring as governess to the household's ward, a small forgotten girl named Beatrice. You should know about Beatrice too, because the hall had all but stopped seeing her. She was a distant cousin of the Renfells, orphaned and dropped at Carnhale like a parcel no one had ordered. And Prout kept her only because turning a child of the family into the road would have looked ill. So Beatrice lived at the top of the house, half forgotten, until Honora came and decided that one forgotten thing in that place would be forgotten no longer. Honora had nothing. Understand that. A governess owns her post and little else. Lose the post, and you lose the roof and the bread and the small dignity of a wage, all in one afternoon. She knew what it was to be looked at as furniture. Perhaps that is why she noticed the man in the tack room when no one else would. The first time she saw him truly, it was over the child. Beatrice had wandered down to the stables, the way children do, and a bad-tempered carriage horse had swung its haunches around, and the little girl froze right in the danger of it. And the ragged hand was there before Honora could even cry out. He did not shout. He did not snatch. He put one hand flat on the horse's neck and made a low sound in his throat, and the animal went still as stone, and he lifted the child clear and set her down and stepped back, all in a breath. Then he bowed his head and waited to be scolded, because that was what he had learned to expect. Honora did not scold him. She thanked him, and she watched his face when she did it, because a face that is not used to thanks does a particular thing when it hears them, it does not know where to look. His did that, and she thought, this is not what they say he is. After that she began to leave bread on the tack-room sill, a heel of it, a bit of cheese sometimes, wrapped in a cloth she came back for empty. She never made a show of it. And she spoke to him, not down at him, the way the others did, but across to him, the way you would speak to a gentleman in a drawing-room. Good morning. Is the grey mare's leg any better? The weather's turning. Small things, but no one had said small things to Gideon in a very long time, and he answered them low and short and carefully, and something between them was built out of nothing but ordinary courtesy given where none was expected. That is the whole beginning of it. A rich house that loved to have a poor man to hate, and a poor woman who would not join in. Now the waves begin. The first came over a lamed horse. There was a good hunter in the Carnhale stable, a bay called Sexton, and Sexton came up dead lame one morning, and there was a loose shoe to blame, and a stone driven up into the quick because of it. A valuable animal, half ruined. Somebody would answer for it. And the stable lads had already decided who, before Prout ever came down to the yard. Because the answer was always the same answer. They said Gideon had shod the horse careless. They said he had missed the shoe going loose. Two of them swore to it, quick and easy, the way frightened men lie when there is a safe man to lie about. But here is the thing the yard did not know, and you do. 3 days before, Gideon had told Silas, the old headgroom, mind that name, Silas Trewin, that Sexton's off for shoe was working loose and wanted resetting before it did harm. Silas had heard him. The trouble was, Prout had sent the forge fire cold that week to save coal, and the shoe went unreset, and here was the result of it, and here was Gideon standing in the yard with 2 lads pointing at him. He could have said it. One sentence, I warned Silas of the shoe, and the forge was cold by the steward's order. That is all it would have taken, and any fair man would have turned then and looked hard at Prout's economies. But Gideon looked at old Silas standing white, faced at the edge of the crowd. Silas, who would have been ruined for confirming it, an old man turned off with no character and no pension, and Gideon shut his mouth. He took it. He stood there and let them dock a fortnight's wage, and heard himself called a fool and a butcher of good horseflesh, and he never once lifted his eyes to save himself. because saving himself would have cost the old man everything. Honora saw it from the schoolroom window. She saw the lad's point, and Gideon not answer, and she saw the old groom's face, and though she could not have told you the whole of it, she understood the shape of the thing, a man taking a blow that belonged to someone else. She had a strange thought then, which she did not say to anyone. She thought a fool would have argued. Only a certain kind of man stays silent to protect another, and she did not know what to do with that thought, so she kept it. That night the candle burned again in the tack room, and this is what the ragged hand was doing, in the dark, when the house believed him asleep on the straw. He had the estate ledgers, not the fair ones Prout showed the bank. The old working accounts of Wheel Josanne, the tin royalties, book after book of them going back years, and he was copying them. In a clean, fast, educated hand he was setting one column against another, what the mine had actually raised, sold at the tin ticketings in Truro, against what the estate books said it had raised. Two figures that should have matched. And they did not match. They had not matched in 11 years. He worked it slowly, because slowness makes certainty. And when he had it, at last, he wrote the difference at the foot of the page and sat looking at it. £11,000. £11,000, skimmed off the top of the town's own labour across 11 years, gone somewhere no account named. That was the figure that had made his jaw set. That was the number. A stable hand cannot read his own wages. That is what 40 people had laughed at. And here was the stable hand reading 11 years of a thief's arithmetic by a single candle, and finding the thief out to the pound. He pinched the candle dead between his fingers. He did not even wince. Now Honora, in those same weeks, noticed a small thing and made nothing of it. I want you to notice it too, and then set it down, and forget it, the way she did. Above the tack-room door there was an old horseshoe, nailed up points to the sky, the way country folk nail them for luck. It was worn and dark and nothing to look at. But she saw one afternoon that when a stable lad reached up idly to touch it, Gideon crossed the room fast, faster than she'd ever seen him move for anything, and took the boy's wrist and set it down. Gentle, but certain. "Leave it," he said. "It's for luck." And the boy shrugged and left it. And Honora thought, how odd, a man with nothing, and the one thing he guards is a rusty horseshoe. And then Beatrice called her, and she thought no more about it. Remember the horseshoe, that is all I ask. Just remember it. The second wave came at the Michaelmas hiring, and it was a public thing, done for the pleasure of an audience. Michaelmas is when the old year's wages are settled and the new year's hiring is fixed, and all the estate came up to the yard for it, tenants and servants both, because everyone's living was in that reckoning. Prout sat at a table with the account books open before him and paid each man out and named his terms, and he did it slowly, enjoying it, because a man paying wages is the nearest thing to a king a steward will ever be. When Gideon came to the table, Prout looked up and smiled the smile that is worse than a scowl. And he made a show of it. He held Gideon's few coins in his hand and said, for the yard to hear, that a beast which could not read the figures could not be cheated of them, so he would keep back a portion for the horse that was spoiled, and for the schooling the fellow plainly never had, and he laughed at his own wit. He gave the ragged hand half of what was owed, and dared him, with his eyes, to count it. Cressida Prout was at her father's shoulder, and Cressida jeered. She was 22 and handsome and empty as a rung bell, and she had a way of looking at Gideon that was worse than her father's cruelty, because her father's cruelty had greed behind it, and hers had nothing behind it at all. "Perhaps he'll take it in oats," she said, and tittered, and the lads near her laughed to please her. Gideon took the half-wage. He closed his clean-nailed hand over it. He bowed his head, and he walked away without a word, and the whole yard felt very fine about themselves for having watched it. Honora stood at the back with Beatrice's hand in hers, and she did not laugh, and Prout marked that she did not, and filed it away. A steward who rules by fear keeps a list of the ones who do not fear enough. Honora had just put herself on it. Then the trouble came up the drive in a good carriage, and the whole game changed. 2 men arrived at Carnhale who mattered. One was the county magistrate, a heavy, dull man named Trevanion, who did what the money in the room told him to do. The other was a smooth grey gentleman from Carnhale and Pike, the banking house in Truro. And the servants' hall had the truth of it out of the coachman within the hour, the way servants always do. The estate was mortgaged, £4,000 borrowed against Carnhale and its failing mine, and Wheeljosan's tin running thin and poor now, the good loads worked out, the price fallen. Prout could not hold it much longer. So Prout meant to sell. Sell the whole estate, town and mine and hall and tenancies, before Lady Day quarter, and take the price and be gone before the ground gave way under him. Sell it out from under 40 families who had no notion their homes were on a banker's table. That is the day the loudest injustice happened, and I want you in the hall for it, because it is the hinge of everything. They were in the great hall, Prout and the magistrate and the bank's man, with papers spread and half the household hovering at the doors the way a household does when its fate is being decided in the next breath. And the bank's grey gentleman wanted the mortgage papers witnessed properly, names on the witness lines, all in order. And Prout, wanting to please him, wanting to seem a jolly fellow master of a jolly easy house, had a cruel bright idea. He sent for the half-wit groom. They brought Gideon in from the yard, dirty from work, and Prout put a pen in his hand before the gentleman and said, laughing, that they should see a marvel, a man who would make his mark, his cross, like a peasant of the last century, and would not know his own name if it were writ before him. Make your mark, groom, he said, put your cross on the line. And the banksman half smiled, ready to be amused, and the magistrate waited, and the servants at the door craned to see the ragged hand shamed one more delicious time. And Gideon set the pen to the paper, and for one instant, one single instant, he forgot himself, because a man who has been a gentleman all his life does not make a cross. His hand knows better. His hand, before his mind can stop it, begins to write. And Gideon's hand began to write, clean and swift and educated, the downstroke of a proper signature flowing out onto the witness line before he could catch it. Prout did not see, not truly, not what it meant. The magistrate did not see, but Honora saw. Honora was at the door, and Honora saw the ragged, stable hand begin, out of pure buried habit, to sign a beautiful, full-flowing hand, the hand of a schooled and high-born man, and her breath stopped in her chest. And Gideon saw it too, saw what his own hand had betrayed. And in the same instant, before the first letters had even dried, he dragged the nib back and forth across them, hard, twice, ruining it, smearing the whole into an ugly, senseless scrawl, a blot, a nothing, a mark that could have been made by any brute in the parish. And he let his shoulders round, and his head drop, and he stood there stupid, the fool they all knew. The banksman laughed. "Look at that," he said. "Quite hopeless." And Prout laughed too, but there was something under Prout's laugh now that had not been there before. A flicker. He looked at the smeared line and then at the man who had made it, and for just a moment the steward was not sure of something, and Josiah Prout hated more than anything in the world not to be sure. So he did what small cruel men do with a doubt. He drowned it in violence. He called the ragged hand a clumsy dog for spoiling the gentleman's paper, and had him thrashed out of the hall, then and there dragged out and struck across the back and shoulders, and put into the yard in the cold. Made an end of the doubt by beating the man who caused it. And as they hauled Gideon out, Prout turned to the bank's grey gentleman and said the thing you must hold on to, because you will hear it again before this is done. He shook his head, easy and amused, and he said, "A drowned man has no claim, and a dumb one no name. Dead men sign nothing." He meant it as a joke. He did not know he had just spoken his own sentence. Honora went out to the yard after dark, when the hall had emptied of its gentlemen. She should not have. A woman who wants to keep her post does not creep out to tend a beaten stable hand at night. If it were seen, it would be the end of her, and she knew it. She went anyway. She took warm water and clean linen and what salve she had, and she found him in the tack room, sitting very straight on the edge of the straw with his shirt off his shoulders and the candle out, because he could not have afforded to burn it and did not need to see his own hurts. His back was welted and torn. She did not gasp. She had grown up hard. She knew how to be steady over a wound. She knelt and she cleaned it. And he let her, silent, only his breath catching once when the water first touched the roar of it. And there, in the dark, in the small circle of the trust she had built out of bread and courtesy, he spoke to her more than he had ever spoken. Not the whole of it. Not yet. But she asked him low why he had smeared the signature, and he was too tired and too hurt to lie well, and he said, "Because a mark is safe, a hand is not." And she said, and her heart was going hard as she said it, "That was a gentleman's hand you began to write." He was quiet a long moment. Then he said, "It was." She could have gone straight to Prout with that. Do you see how much power she suddenly held? The steward would have paid handsomely to know his half-wit groom wrote a schooled hand and read his own wages perfectly well and had reason to hide it. Honora, with nothing in the world but a post she needed, held a thing worth money to a cruel man. She kept it. She said, "Then I have seen nothing, and I will go on seeing nothing." And she felt him look at her in the dark, and she understood that she had just given something away that she could not take back, not the secret, the trust. She had chosen a side, and the side she had chosen was the ragged man's against the whole weight of the house. Over the next weeks she learned more, not by prying, but because he began slowly to let her. She found he read Latin as easy as English. She caught him once with an old worn book of the Georgics, Virgil of all things, in a stable, and that he could cast a column of figures in his head faster than she could write it down. She stopped being surprised and started being certain. Whatever Gideon was, he was not what Carnhale said he was. He was a man wearing rags the way another man wears a false name, and she began, without ever deciding to fall in love with him, not with a story of who he might be, with him. The quiet of him, the care in his hands, the way he had taken a whipping to save an old man's place. And then she saw the ring. It was the horseshoe, the lucky horseshoe over the door, the one he would let no one touch. Beatrice, playing where she should not, had knocked a stool under it and reached up before Honora could stop her, and the old shoe had tipped on its nail, and something slid out of the hollow of it, out from the packed cloth, and dust jammed up inside the iron's curve, and dropped and rolled bright across the floor. Honora picked it up, and she went cold to the soles of her feet. It was a gold signet ring, heavy, old, a man's ring, and cut into the face of it was a crest, a little wren, wings spread, standing upon a sheaf of corn. She knew that crest. Everyone at Carnhale knew that crest. It was carved in the stone over the great door of the hall itself. It was the badge of the Earls of Trevorrow, the badge of the Renfells. A stable hand does not carry the Earl's own signet in gold. A stable hand hides a horseshoe over his door, because that horseshoe is a hollow strongbox, and the treasure in it is a name. Gideon came in and saw her holding it, and neither of them spoke, and the whole false world of Carnhale hung silent in the space between them. Then, very gently, he took it from her open hand. He did not explain. He put it back into the hollow of the shoe and set the shoe on its nail, but his taking it from her was not a denial. It was a man closing his hand over the last true thing he owned, in front of the one person he had decided he could bear to have see it. The confirmation, for us, came through the old groom. Silas Trewin had served the true Earls of Carnhale for 40 years. He had held the 5th Earl's stirrup. He had put the 5th Earl's sons up on their first ponies, and Silas was 66 now and half blind with the years, but a man does not need eyes to know a thing he has known all his life. There was a savage colt in the stable that season that no one could handle, and it had half killed a lad, and Prout was for shooting it. And one evening, when the yard was empty, Silas watched Gideon go into that colt's box alone, and stand still, and make the low sound in his throat, the sound he'd made for the carriage horse, for Sexton, for every frightened animal in the place, and the killer colt dropped its head and leaned its whole trembling weight against the ragged man's chest like a child, and went quiet. And old Silas stood in the door of the stable, and his hands began to shake, and tears ran down into the white stubble of his cheeks. Because there was only one man he had ever seen quiet a horse in just that way, with just that sound, with just that stillness. The young master, Gabriel, the boy the sea was supposed to have taken 11 years ago. Silas said nothing to Gideon, not one word. He was too afraid to be wrong, afraid to be right, afraid of what Prout would do to an old man who knew too much. But that night, Silas oiled a bridle that did not need oiling until his hands stopped shaking, and he made himself a promise, the kind an old man makes when he can feel his own end coming up the road. He promised he would live long enough to see the wrong of this house set right, whatever it cost him. He owed the dead Earl that much, and he owed the boy more. Prout, meanwhile, was tidying his affairs, and part of tidying his affairs was tidying the household into respectability. A house that is about to be sold must look well, and a governess who tends beaten grooms in the dark is not respectable. So Prout began, in his oily way, to manage Honora. He floated the notion of a match for her, a dry stick of a neighbouring gentleman, a Mr. Carew with a small property and a large opinion of himself, who wanted a governess wife because a real one cost more. It was put to Honora as a kindness. As her great good fortune, a poor governess offered a respectable roof, what fool would say no? And in the same season, Prout was steering his own daughter Cressida toward whatever title or fortune the sale of the estate might blow in on the wind, for Cressida hunted rank the way a hound hunts, single-minded and without shame, and her father meant her landed before the money ran out. Honora said no to Mr. Carew. Understand what that cost her. She had nothing. Mr. Carew was security, a name, a door that would never be shut in her face. And she looked at that door, and then she looked at the tack room where a man with a beaten back read Virgil by no candle, and she chose the tack room. She chose the poor man. She did not yet know his name. She did not know about the drowned Earl, or the deed, or any of it. She chose him poor, believing him poor, with nothing to gain by it and everything to lose. Remember that too. Whatever comes after, remember that she loved him when there was no reason on earth to but the man himself. Now we come to the turn of it. The middle, where the ground gives way. Because Gideon had decided something. Not revenge, mark that, it matters. He never once schemed to strike Prout down, to shame him, to take back the hall by force or by night. That was not in him. 11 years of hiding had burned the wanting of it out of him, or perhaps it had never been there. What he wanted was smaller and harder. He wanted to stop the sale. He wanted to keep 40 families from waking one Lady Day to find themselves sold like the furniture. That was all. That was everything. And to stop the sale he needed proof that the will Prout ruled by was a forgery, proof of where the true right lay. And his own copied ledgers were not enough. A steward can always call a groom's papers a lie. He needed the thing itself. He needed what his father had left. Because Gideon knew something no one else living knew. His father, the old 5th Earl in his last years, had stopped trusting his steward. Ambrose Renfell had felt the man's greed like a drought under a door, and being a careful old fox, he had made provision. He had drawn up a true deed and a sealed codicil setting out the real descent of the estate, and he had not left them in the house, where Prout's hands could reach. He had hidden them. In the one place on the estate a steward never went, and a family always did. The chapel. There is a small family chapel below the hall, older than the hall itself, damp and half forgotten, where the Renfells had christened and married and buried their dead for 300 years. Ambrose had lodged his proof there 11 years ago, behind the stone that carried his own father's name, and he had meant to tell Gabriel of it. But the quarrel came, and the sea, and the old man died with the secret half told, enough of it reaching his son, across years and oceans, to bring that son home at last. Not to seize a title, to dig a truth out of a wall. Gideon took Honora to the chapel on a night with no moon. He should not have trusted her with it. He knew that. Trust had killed better hidden men than him. But she had chosen the tack room over the respectable door, and a man cannot carry 11 years alone forever, and so he took her hand, the first time he had ever done so, and led her down through the wet grass to the old chapel with a shielded lantern, and he told her, standing among his own ancestors' graves, the thing he had not said aloud to a living soul in 11 years. He said his name. He said, "My father was Ambrose Renfell." His voice broke on it a little, the way a voice breaks on a word it has kept shut too long. "And I am his elder son. I am Gabriel." And he told her the rest of it low and fast in the dark, the quarrel that Prout had poisoned between father and son, a disgrace half forged to drive him out, the ship and the wreck off the manacles that everyone had counted his grave, how he had not drowned but washed up broken and nameless on a foreign shore, and lived years as nothing, as no one, believing himself forgotten, and how word had reached him at last of what Prout had done to his father's house, and how he had come home not as an earl, not with lawyers and claims, for he had no proof and Prout had every advantage, but as a ghost. A ragged ghost in his own stable, taking blows and biding, gathering the one thing that could undo the lie. The truth, written in his father's own hand, waiting behind a stone. And Honora stood in the dark of the chapel and understood, all at once, the whole of what had happened to her. She had left bread on a sill for the lost heir of Carnhale. She had tended the beaten back of the 6th Earl of Trevorrow. She had refused a respectable marriage to sit in the straw with a man the sea had failed to keep. She had fallen in love with a poor stable hand, and the poor stable hand was the master of the very ground the hall stood on. And none of that, not one grain of it, changed a single thing she felt. That was the wonder that went through her in the dark. Not that he was highborn, that it did not matter that he was. Gabriel, for we may as well call him true now, in the dark of the chapel where he first dared his own name, went to the memorial stone, his father's stone, and he set his clean, wrong gentleman's hands against the cold face of it, and felt along the edge where the mortar had been picked out and packed back 11 years before, and the stone shifted, grated, gave, and the lantern light fell into a black hollow in the wall, and there, wrapped in oiled cloth gone dark with damp, was a packet. Sealed, the size of a folded deed, the thing his father had hidden, the thing that could stop the sale, break the forger, and give a whole town back its home. Honora's breath came fast. Gabriel reached in with a steady hand and drew it out into the light, and then the steadiness went out of him. Because as the cloth fell open at one edge, they both saw it. The packet was water-stained through, and one of the two seals that should have held it whole, the seal that made it proof and not paper, was cracked clean across, broken, and in the ringing quiet of that chapel, with his father's name under his hand and the town's whole future in his grip, Gabriel Renfell heard the small dead sound of the one thing he had not counted on. Footsteps on the chapel path, coming down through the wet grass toward the door. The footsteps stopped at the door. Gabriel put the lantern behind the stone. He drew Honora back into the black. His hand found hers, and neither of them breathed. The latch lifted. The old chapel door swung on its wet hinge, and a shape came in out of the rain. It was small. Bent. It carried no light of its own. "Master Gabriel," the shape said. An old voice, a cracked voice. "I know you're in here. I saw your lantern from the yard. It was Silas Trewin." Gabriel came out of the dark slowly. The old groom stood dripping in the doorway, his cap in his 2 hands, 66 years of him gone soft at the knees. And he looked at the young man in the ragged coat, and his mouth worked, and no sound came for a long moment. "I knew you," Silas said at last. "The day you quieted the black colt, the one that killed the Bassett boy. You put your hand flat on his neck, and you said a word into his ear, and he went still as church. Only one man ever gentled a horse that road, and he's been 11 years drowned." The old man's eyes ran over. "I told myself I dreamed it. An old fool dreams. But I didn't dream it. Did I?" "No, Silas," Gabriel said. "You didn't dream it." The old man came across the stones and went down on one knee, hard, the way old men kneel, all at once and painful. And Gabriel caught him under the arm and would not let him. "Get up," he said. "Get up, you old fool. You held the stirrup for me when I was 6. You'll not kneel to me now." But Silas held to his sleeve, and his shoulders shook, and he said the thing he had carried 11 years. "They said you quarrelled with your father. They said you took a boat out in the Blow to spite him, and the sea took you, and your father died of it inside the year." "Grief," they said. "Grief killed the 5th Earl." He looked up. "It wasn't grief, master, was it? It was that man, that Prout." "It was Prout," Gabriel said quietly. "My father found the skimming. £11,000 gone out of the tin over 11 years, a little at a time, so the loss looked like the mine failing." He confronted his steward. "And within a fortnight my father was dead, and there was a will no one had ever seen, and I was drowned off my own coast." He set the old man on his feet. "I did quarrel with him, Silas, that much is true. Over nothing. Over a horse, and I went to sea angry, and the ship went down off Ushant, and I woke on a French beach, with no name left worth having. By the time I found my way home, my father was in the ground and Prout was in the hall, and there was a paper that said I was nobody. So I came back as nobody. And I waited." Silas wiped his face with the flat of his hand. "You waited 11 years. I waited for this." Gabriel held up the packet, the oiled cloth, the broken seal, the true deed, and a codicil in my father's hand, sworn before he died, naming me his heir and calling any will that says otherwise a forgery. He hid it here, in his own father's stone, because he trusted the dead more than he trusted the living. The old man reached out one shaking finger and touched the wax, and his face fell, because he saw what they had seen. "It's broke," he said. "The seal's broke clean across." "Yes, then it's no good. A broke seal's no proof. Prout'll say you cracked it yourself. He'll say you forged the whole of it." Silas's voice climbed. "He'll burn it and thrash you off the land, and there's an end." "There would be," Honora said, and stepped into the light, "if this were the only copy." Both men turned. She had thought it out in the dark, while they wept over each other. She had a governess's mind. She thought in terms of what could be shown, and to whom, and in what order. "A broken seal cannot be trusted on its own," she said. "But there is a man alive who can. Mr. Hallward, your father's solicitor, the one Prout turned off the estate the same year he took power. He drew the true will. He kept the impressions of your father's genuine seal, solicitors always do, against exactly this. If Hallward sets his impressions beside this wax, and the magistrate matches the deed's hand to the estate rolls, then a cracked seal proves nothing against it. The forgery is the forgery." Not this. Gabriel looked at her a long moment. You've a wicked good head, Miss Vale. I've a frightened good head, she said. There's a difference. Prout means to sell on Lady Day. That's a fortnight off. We have a fortnight to bring a dead man's deed back to life. They did not sleep that night, any of the three. Silas went among the old tenants, the ones with grey in their hair who remembered the young master, who remembered the 5th Earl walking his own fields with his hat in his hand for the women. He spoke low, in kitchens, over hedges. He did not say the name. He said, only, be at the hall on sale day. All of you. Every family off the wheel Josanne. There's a thing you'll want to see with your own eyes. Honora wrote the note to Hallward with a borrowed pen, in the schoolroom, with the ward Beatrice asleep across the little bed. She wrote it plain. She sealed it with a candle. She gave it to the fish carrier who went to Truro twice a week, and she gave him a shilling she could not spare, and she told him it was worth his life to put it in no hand but the solicitor's own. And Gabriel copied. All that fortnight, by his one candle, in the tack room, under the horseshoe over the door, he copied the deed and the codicil out in a fair clerk's hand. Copy after copy. Because he had learned in 11 years that a man who wants a thing burned will always burn what is nearest to hand, and be satisfied. Give the fire something to eat, and it eats, and it does not ask if there is more. Prout felt it. He was a rat, and rats feel the floor tilt before the house comes down. He could not have said what troubled him, only that the stable hand's eyes had changed. There was a stillness in the man now that had not been there. Prout remembered the signature, the full, educated hand that had flowed out of the drudge's fingers at the hall table before the man caught himself and smeared it. He had told himself it meant nothing. A trained beast, a mimic. He had told the banksman so, and laughed. But the laugh had gone stale in his mouth in the weeks since, and he did not know why. So Prout did what frightened men do. He struck first. He called Gideon into the estate office on a grey afternoon, with Cressida sitting by the window at her needlework, there to watch. And he did not sit the man down. He kept him standing on the bare board like a summoned dog. "You're turned off," Prout said, "as of this hour. There's no place for you here. Take your bundle and go by the north gate before dark, and if I find you on Carnhale land after, I'll have you before the magistrate for a vagrant, and see you whipped at the cart's tail through Porthmerow." He dipped his pen and went back to his figures, as if the man were already gone. "That's all." Gideon did not move. Prout looked up. "I said that's all." "You'll want to be careful, Mr. Prout," Gideon said, "who you turn off this land, before Lady Day." And Cressida laughed, high and bright, over her needle. "Listen to it," she said. "The groom. Careful, Papa, the horseboy has an opinion. Perhaps he'll write us a letter about it." She let her eyes go up and down the ragged coat, the broken boots, the great scarred hands. "Do you know," she said, sweet as poison, "I truly believe he thinks himself a gentleman. Look at him stand there. Chin up, as though the muck on his boots were another man's." She turned back to her work. "Send it away, Papa. It smells of the yard." Gideon looked at her for a moment. Just a moment. There was no anger in his face. That was the thing she would remember later, and it would burn her worse than anger. There was no anger in it at all. Only a kind of patience, the patience of a man watching a clock he alone can read. "Good day, Miss Prout," he said, and bowed to her, a proper bow, from the waist, the bow of a man who had made 1,000 of them in rooms she would never be let into, and went out. And Cressida's needle stopped in the cloth. Because that bow had been wrong. It had been too good. And for one cold second she did not know what she had just been shown. And she did not like the not knowing. Prout sold on the 16th. The man from Carnhale and Pike came out from Truro in his good coat, the smooth grey gentleman, and they sat in the great hall with the fire lit and the papers spread, and Prout signed the estate away for a price that would clear the 4,000 mortgage and leave him rich enough to be gone before the ink cured. He signed with a flourish. He was master of Carnhale, and the paper said so, and a dead man and a drowned man could say nothing against it. "To the sale," said the banksman, and lifted his glass. "To the sale," said Prout. And he laughed, and the laugh was easy again at last. "You know what I said to you, that day the half-wit made his mark? Dead men sign nothing. There's the whole of estate law in 4 words, sir. Dead men sign nothing." He drank. Lady Day. The tenant's clear by Lady Day, and the new owner does as he likes with the ground, and I'm in Bath with my feet to a better fire than this one. He did not know that in Truro that same morning, in a small dry office, an old solicitor named Hallward had held a broken seal up to the window light beside a wax impression he had kept in a drawer 11 years, and had gone white, and then had gone still, and had said to the fisher boy who brought it, "You will wait, boy, you will wait. And you will carry back 1 word from me, and the word is yes." Prout burned the packet on the 18th. He found the chapel stone. Of course he found it. He was a suspicious man, and he had begun to watch the governess, and the governess had gone to the chapel too often for a woman with no dead of her own to mourn. He followed her. He waited till she left. He worked the loosened stone with his own hands, and he drew out the oiled cloth. And he read enough of it by the grey light through the chapel window to understand, at last, exactly what had troubled him all these weeks. He carried it back to the hall at a near run, and he threw it on the fire. He made them watch. That was the cruelty of the man. He had Gideon dragged in from the yard and Honora fetched down from the schoolroom, and he stood them before the hearth, and he fed the packet to the flames a leaf at a time, and he was laughing while he did it, a thin, cracked laughing that was half fright. "There's your deed," he said. "There's your proof, groom, there's your 11 years. The wax hissed and ran, the paper curled and caught. You mad pauper. You and your kitchen-maid governess, plotting in a chapel over a drowned man's letters. Did you think? Did you truly think? A leaf went up in a bright flare, and he flinched from it. I'll have you both certified. Both of you. Mad. The pair of you. There's an end of it. There's an end." And Gideon watched his father's deed burn, and he said nothing at all. He let the man laugh. He let the last leaf go black in the grate. And Honora, beside him, understood by the very stillness of his hand in hers that the thing on the fire was not the thing that mattered, and she held her face still, and she let Prout have his fire. Because the true deed and the true codicil, in the 5th Earl's own hand and under his own true seal, had been re-lodged that very morning, the morning of the 18th, with Mr. Hallward and with the county magistrate, sworn and witnessed and locked in a strong-box in Truro. What burned in the great hall of Carnhale was a copy in a stable hand's careful clerkly hand. Prout burned paper. He thought he had burned 11 years. He had burned an afternoon's work by candlelight, and he had shown Gideon, past all doubt now, exactly what kind of man he was dealing with. "Lady Day," Prout said, breathing hard, when the grate held only ash. "You'll both be gone by Lady Day or in the county asylum. Now get out of my hall." "Your hall," Gideon said. It was almost gentle. "Yes, get us out of your hall, Mr. Prout." And he took Honora's arm, and they went. Lady Day came grey and bright, with a wind off the sea. The great hall of Carnhale filled by 10. The banksman in his good coat, at Prout's right hand, with the sale papers in a leather case. The county magistrate, Trevagnon, heavy and red and doing as the money in the room told him, because that was the whole of his character. Cressida in her best, at the window end, because there was to be a new owner, and new owners sometimes had unmarried sons. And the tenants. The 40 families off the Wheel Josanne, and the servants of the hall, packed to the back wall and out the doors, brought there by an old groom's whisper, not one of them knowing why, only that they had been told to come and see. The same 40. The very same 40 who had stood in the Michaelmas yard and heard Josiah Prout say, before God and everyone, that a creature who could not read his own wages was worth half of them. Prout stood at the head of the long table. He was uneasy. There were too many of his tenants in the room, and he did not know who had called them, and it prickled at him. But the sale was made. The papers were signed. A man cannot unsign a sold estate with a room full of poor people. He put his knuckles on the table, and he called the room to order. "You're here," he said, "to see the estate change hands, as by law it does this day. Mr. Penrose of Carnhale and Pike holds the papers." "I'll trouble you all to—" "You'll trouble us to nothing, Josiah Prout." The voice came from the door, an old man's voice, dry as a legal page, and it carried the length of the hall. Mr. Hallward came in out of the wind. He was thin and grey and very upright, and he had a strong-box under his arm, and behind him came 2 men of the magistrates, and behind them, quiet in the ragged coat still, hatless, his scarred hands empty at his sides, came the stable hand. The room turned. 40 faces turned. "I am Josiah Hallward," the old man said, "solicitor, lately of this parish, dismissed from the service of this estate 11 years ago by the man who stands at that table, dismissed, I may say, the same quarter he became its master." He set the strong-box on the long table with a solid weight. "I have a deed to read. I'd ask the magistrate to attend closely, for he'll be asked to swear to a seal before this hour is out." "This is nonsense," Prout said. His voice had gone up. "This man was turned off for a thief, and he's a discharged clerk with a grievance. He's—" "Sit down, Mr. Prout," said the magistrate. Trevanion did not like his morning disturbed, but he liked less the strong-box, and the 2 officers, and the smell of law in the room. "Let the man read. If it's nothing, it's nothing, and you've lost 10 minutes. Read." Hallward. Hallward opened the box. He drew out the deed. He drew out the codicil in its oiled cloth, and unfolded it with an old man's care, and held it to the window light so the room could see there was writing on it, and a seal below the writing. And he read. He read the deed of Carnhale, of the manor and the mine and the 40 holdings, granted 300 years since to the line of Renfell, Earls of Trevorrow. He read down the descent of it, name by name, Earl by Earl, to Ambrose Renfell, the 5th Earl. And then he read the codicil. Sworn by Ambrose Renfell, of sound mind before 2 witnesses now dead, in the last month of his life. And the room went very quiet, because a man could feel the thing turning under the words before he understood them. "To my elder son, Gabriel Renfell," Hallward read, "living, whatever any man may say of the sea, to Gabriel, and to no other, I give and bequeath the whole of my estate of Carnhale, its manor, its mine, its rents and royalties, entire. And I do hereby declare that any testament produced after my death which names another as my heir, and my son as dead or disinherited, is a forgery, and the work of a false hand, and I name that hand, should it come to it, the hand of my steward, Josiah Prout. Let this stand against him when I cannot." The room did not breathe. "There is a seal," Hallward said. He carried the codicil down the table and laid it before the magistrate. Beside it he laid a small square of wax from his drawer, an impression 11 years old, kept against exactly this hour. "The seal is cracked. It was cracked by damp in its hiding, not by any hand. I ask you to match it, sir, against this, the true impression of the 5th Earl's seal. Taken by me in his lifetime, in my own office, and kept in my own strong-box these 11 years. Match the wren and the sheaf. Match the broken line to the whole. And swear to what you see." Trevanion bent his heavy red face to the 2 seals. He held them to the light. He was a lazy man and a bought man, but he was not, in the last of it, a fool, and there were 40 tenants watching him. And there is a point past which even a bought man will not put his own neck. He looked a long time. "They're the same seal," he said. He said it low, then he cleared his throat and said it so the room could hear. This is the 5th Earl's seal, the one against the other. There's no question of it. This is the true seal of Carnhale, and this," he touched the codicil, "this is genuine, or I never saw a genuine thing in my life." And now the room began to turn to Prout. Slowly, face after face. "That deed names a dead man," Prout said. He was gripping the table. His knuckles had gone white on it. "Gabriel Renfell is 11 years drowned. A deed to a drowned man is waste paper. It gives nothing to no one. The boy is dead. Everyone in this county knows the boy is dead." "Is he?" said the stable hand, and he came forward out of the crowd. He came to the long table in his ragged coat, past the tenants who parted for him without knowing yet why they parted. And he reached into his coat and drew out a thing wrapped in a rag, and unwrapped it and set it down on the table beside the deed, beside the 2 seals, in the grey window light. A gold signet ring, the Trevorrow crest, a wren above a sheaf. "Match it," he said quietly, to the magistrate, "the ring to the wax." Trevanion took up the ring in his thick fingers. He pressed it. There was a candle at the table and soft wax by it for the sale. He pressed the ring into the wax and lifted it, and there stood the wren above the sheaf, sharp and true, the very twin of the seal on the 5th Earl's deed. The same die, the Earl's own signet that goes from father to son, that no forger can counterfeit, because there is only ever the one. "Where?" said Trevanion slowly. "Did a stable hand come by the signet ring of the Earls of Trevorrow?" "From my father's hand," Gabriel said. "The night before I went to sea. He put it on my finger himself. I have worn it 11 years next to my skin, and hidden it in a horseshoe over a tack-room door, in the house that is mine, waiting for a morning I could set it on this table, without being called mad or hanged for a thief." He looked up, and he looked down the length of the hall at the 40 faces, and his voice did not rise, but it filled the room. "My name is Gabriel Renfell. I am the 6th Earl of Trevorrow, and I have been mucking your stables for a 12-month, and eating what the kitchen threw the dogs, and taking a crop across my hands from my own head-groom. Old Silas made a broken sound at the back, and I have said nothing, because a dead man has no name to speak with, and Josiah Prout made me a dead man. Until today." "He lies," Prout said. "But it came out thin. He's a madman. He's a—" "He gentled the black colt," said Silas Trewin, and came forward shaking into the space before the table. "The one that killed a boy. Only the young master ever gentled a horse that road. I've kept the stables of the true Earls 40 years, and I put this man's father on his first pony, and I'd know the son's hands in the dark. It's him. God be thanked, and my old eyes, it's him." "There's a scar," said another voice. The old cook, from the kitchen door, wiping her red hands on her apron, tears standing in the creases of her face. "On the young master's left forearm. He had it off a garden wall when he was 7, and I bound it myself, and it healed crooked. Show them, master, show them your arm." And Gabriel pushed back the ragged sleeve, and there on the left forearm was the old crooked scar, white and plain, and the cook put her apron to her mouth and wept, and the room made a sound like a long breath let go. And then it turned, all of it, all 40 faces, to Josiah Prout. He had gone the colour of ash. He stood at the head of his stolen table, with his white knuckles on the wood, and his eyes going from face to face, and finding no face that was with him. Not the banksman, who had drawn back and closed his leather case very quietly. Not the magistrate, who would not meet his eye. Not his own daughter. "The £11,000, Hallward said, and now his dry voice had an edge in it 11 years old. "While we're all here. I have the mine's true royalty accounts, copied out fair, and I have the accounts this man showed to the bank, and they do not agree, and they have not agreed in 11 years. £11,000 of the tin off Wheel Josanne, skimmed a little at a time. So it looked like the mine dying when it was only a man stealing. That was why the fifth Earl confronted his steward. That was the quarrel the county still whispers about, not between a father and a son at all, between an earl and his thief. And within a fortnight the earl was dead, and the son was drowned, and there was a will no living soul had ever seen. He set the papers down. Take him, magistrate, before the same 40 who heard him call this man a half-wit. Dead men sign nothing, Gabriel said. He said it into the silence, and he said it to Prout, and he watched the words go into the man like a blade going in slow. You said it to the banksman, at that table with your glass in your hand. Dead men sign nothing. There's the whole of estate law in 4 words, you said. He set his own hand flat on the true deed, the living hand, the scarred hand, the hand that had signed a full educated line and smeared it to save his life. I signed nothing all these years. You're right. A dead man can't. So I waited to be alive again. And here I am. And here is my father's hand, and here is his seal, and here is the ring off my own finger. And you are a forger and a thief, and I think the murderer of my father, though that last I may never prove. 2 of the 3 will do. Trevanion nodded to his men. They took Prout by the arms. He did not fight them. He had gone somewhere behind his own eyes. As they turned him toward the door, he came back for one moment and looked at Gabriel, and his mouth moved, and what came out of it was small and dazed. The half-wit groom, he said. You held my horse, you held my stirrup, as if that of all of it were the thing he could not make fit. I held your stirrup, Gabriel agreed, and you cropped my hand for being slow to it. Take him out. They took him out. 40 faces watched him go, the same 40. Some of them had laughed, that Michaelmas day in the yard. None of them laughed now. Cressida had risen from the window seat. She came across the hall in a rustle of her best silk, and her face had changed, oh, it had changed entire. The sweetness poured back into it from some quick cold cellar, and she sank down before the ragged coat in a curtsy so low and so graceful that it must have cost her a lifetime's practice to learn. My lord, she said, my lord, I never, you must know I never truly, a woman says things, in play, she doesn't mean the half of, and I always felt, I always sensed, there was something in you, something above the common. I said as much to Papa, I said. Miss Prout, Gabriel said. She looked up, radiant, hopeful, already the Countess in her own head. You said I smelled of the yard, he said. Not unkindly. That was the worst of it. For her there was no cruelty in it at all, only a clear and level courtesy, the courtesy a gentleman owes even to a thing he has finished with. You told your father to send me away because I stank of the stables. You said I thought myself a gentleman, as though it were the funniest thing in Cornwall. He inclined his head to her, the exact same bow he had given her in the office, the one that had frightened her because it was too good. I wish you well, he said. Good day. And he turned from her. That was all. He simply turned, and she was left kneeling in her silk on the stones of a hall that would never be hers, and the turning of his back said everything the reveal had been for. It showed her, and the whole room, precisely and forever what she had been. She got to her feet. No one helped her. She went out by the side door and was not much spoken of again. And Gabriel Renfrew, 6th Earl of Trevorrow, master now in law of every stone and field and shaft of Carnhale, restored, authenticated, bowed to, turned, before he did one other thing, before he put on a single earl's garment or sat in a single earl's chair, and crossed the hall in his ragged coat to where Honora Vale stood against the back wall among the servants she had come in with. He went to her first, before all of them, ragged coat and all. Miss Vale, he said. My lord, she said, and her chin was up, and her eyes were wet, and she would not let herself hope, because hope had never yet been kind to a governess. You left bread on my sill, he said, when I was nothing. You refused a good man's roof to sit in the straw, with a drudge who had a whipped back and no name. You loved a poor stable hand. He took her 2 hands in his 2 scarred ones, there, before the 40 faces, before the magistrate and the cook and the weeping old groom. The world will let me marry you now. It would have died before it let me marry you this morning. And I want you to know, before another word, the only thing that's changed since last night is what the world will allow. Not 1 grain of what I'll ask you has changed. I loved you across a tack room sill when I had nothing to offer but a secret and a scar. I'm asking you now with an earldom in my hand, and it's the same asking. Honora, it's the very same asking. Will you have me? I had you, she said, when you were poor. And she was laughing and crying both at once, in the way the human eyes of real feeling always is, ugly and radiant together. Do you truly think a coat and a title will make me say no now? And the great hall of Carnhale, that had heard a man call an earl a half-wit, heard instead the 40 tenants of the wheel Josiah begin, one and then another and then all, to cheer. 6 months on, the sea off Porthmerrow came in soft and green under a September sun. Wheel Josiah was working again. The wheel turned, and the tin came up, and the £11,000 that a thief had bled out of it over 11 years came back, not into a strong box this time, but into roofs. 40 cottages down the valley had new slate on them before the autumn gales. The 4,000 mortgage was cleared and burned, properly burned this time, and in the right grate, and the whole valley stood in the yard to watch it go up. The bank's smooth grey gentleman sent a very civil letter and was not seen again. Beatrice, the ward the household had forgotten, the orphaned child half raised on scraps in a cold corner of the hall, sat now at the long table in the good light with a slate and a primer, and was taught openly at her guardian's own board. And her guardian was the Earl, who had known himself what it was to be counted worth nothing in a great house, and would not have 1 more child in his house counted so. Josiah Prout wrote from his cell in Bodmin, before the assizes, 1 letter to the estate. It asked for money. Silas read it out at the kitchen table for the pleasure of the thing, and then used it to light the fire. The 1 dry word anyone at Carnhale ever said of him after was the cook's. Dead men sign nothing, she said, folding her pastry, nor jailed ones neither. And that was his epitaph. Cressida married that winter a corn factor from Cambourne, a heavy, dull-kind man with money and no title at all, the very thing she had spent her whole life certain she was too fine for. She wrote no letters to Carnhale, and none were expected. And Honora Renfell, Countess of Trevorrow, mistress of the great hall and the mine and the 40 holdings, went out most mornings before the household stirred, in a plain gown, with the kitchen's first loaf in a cloth, and she left bread on the sills of the cottages down the valley, quietly, for the old and the sick and the newly widowed, the way she had once left bread on a tack-room sill for a man the world had thrown away. She did not stop being the woman who did that. Rank never touched it. The Earl wore the Trevorrow signet on his hand, plainly on the working hand, the scarred one, and it went with him into the stables as often as into the study, because he had not forgotten how to gentle a horse, and Silas Trewin, who lived to see it, would let no other hand near the black colt while the master was home. They had cropped his knuckles for being slow to a stirrup. They had docked his wages for a beast that could not read. They had called him, before 40 souls, a creature not worth his own hire. And every ledger in that fair educated hand, every column he had bent his head over by 1 candle while they laughed, every one of them had been his own. A name is not the thing a man is called. It is the thing he does in the long dark when no one thinks him worth the watching. Gabriel Renfell was an earl the whole 11 years the world had him for a drowned pauper. He was only, at last, allowed to be called one. Wherever you're watching this from tonight, comment the name of your town below. I'd like to know how far this old Cornish story has travelled.